Today, we'll go over 20 foods that are really worth including in your diet if you have diabetes. And we'll start with the category that, for some reason, people with diabetes are most afraid of. Fruits. Every time I tell a patient that they can eat fruit, I see pretty much the same reaction. Doctor, how can that be? There's sugar in them. Exactly. There really is sugar in fruit, but the problem isn't the sugar itself, it's the amount and how quickly it enters the bloodstream. A lot of people make the same mistake. They put an apple, grapes, and a chocolate bar in the same category, even though these are completely different foods. In addition to fructose, fruit also contains water, a natural amount of fiber, vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. That's why completely cutting out fruit when you have diabetes is not only unnecessary, but often even harmful. You just need to choose them wisely. So the first fruit I would put on this list is, of course, grapefruit. When it comes specifically to diabetes, grapefruit can be considered one of the best options. Why? Well, first of all, it has relatively few carbohydrates, and secondly, it contains a lot of fiber, which means that blood sugar rises much more gradually after eating it compared to most sweet fruits. Plus, it's an excellent source of vitamin C. But there's one important detail that not everyone knows about. If you aren't taking any medications, most likely you won't have any problems. But for most people with diabetes, things are a bit more complicated. Very often, diabetes is accompanied by high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and heart disease, and a person ends up taking several medications at once. This is where grapefruit can become a problem. It can alter the way enzymes in the liver work. Because of this, some medications start to work very differently from how they're supposed to. For example, the concentration of certain cholesterol-lowering medications can increase, which means the risk of side effects goes up. That's why if you regularly take medications, you should definitely check with your doctor to see if they're compatible with grapefruit. And there are two simple rules. First, never take your pills with grapefruit juice. Absolutely none of them. That's what plain water's for. And second, if you know your medication isn't compatible with grapefruit, it's better to just avoid it rather than trying to experiment on your own. The next fruit is one that many people really underestimate. It's kiwi. And now I'm going to say something that might sound strange to a lot of people. I recommend eating it with the skin on. Why do that? Because the skin contains extra fiber, and fiber acts as a natural brake for diabetes. It slows down the absorption of carbohydrates, helps you feel full longer, and supports healthy bowel function. And interestingly, many people with diabetes complain about chronic constipation. In this regard, kiwi is one of the best fruits. It has plenty of liquid, lots of fiber, and contains substances that help the intestines work more actively. So if there are no contraindications, 2 large kiwis a day can be a great addition to your diet. I've grouped the next products together on purpose because they work in a very similar way. These are raspberries and blueberries. In general, any berries with small seeds deserve special attention. They're sweet and tasty, but at the same time, they contain a lot of fiber, which means your blood sugar rises more slowly after eating them. But there's one thing you definitely need to keep in mind. Any soft berries are chewed very quickly, which means they're also absorbed faster than, say, an apple. So there's a simple way to make them even healthier. Don't eat berries on their own, add some protein to them. For example, plain cottage cheese without sugar. This creates a very interesting effect. The amount of carbohydrates stays the same, but your blood sugar rises much more smoothly after eating because protein and fats slow down stomach emptying. That's exactly why cottage cheese with berries is much better for someone with diabetes than just eating the berries alone. And the last fruit I want to talk about today, because everyone remembers that avocado is also a fruit, and one of the most interesting ones at that. It has very few carbohydrates, but a lot of healthy fats. It's these fats that help slow down the absorption of carbohydrates from other foods. So if you add a little avocado to your salad, you'll feel full for much longer. But here too, it's important not to go to extremes. Very often, someone starts eating healthy. They have avocado toast for breakfast, add some red fish, drizzle everything with oil, and then are genuinely surprised when their weight doesn't go down. Even though the calorie content of such a breakfast can sometimes be higher than that of a full lunch. Avocado is definitely healthy, but just because a food is healthy doesn't mean you can eat it without limits. One small avocado a day is more than enough, especially if you're watching not just your sugar, but your weight as well. So we've covered fruit. Now let's move on to a category of foods that many people, on the contrary, seriously underestimate: vegetables. Among them are some of the healthiest foods for people with diabetes. When people find out they have diabetes, they usually start looking for foods that lower blood sugar. But if you look at the diets of most patients, the problem isn't that they eat too few grapefruits or berries. The problem is that there is a catastrophic lack of vegetables. And not just tomatoes and cucumbers, but specifically those vegetables that are rich in fiber. And now I'll show you a few foods that I recommend to almost every one of my patients. If I were asked to choose one vegetable for a person with diabetes, I would have a hard time deciding between broccoli and zucchini, but I'd probably still choose zucchini. First of all, it's affordable. Second, you can cook it in dozens of different ways. For example, here's a very simple tip. If you're making meat patties, try replacing part of the ground meat with grated zucchini. You'll get a juicier dish. The calorie content, the calories will be lower, there'll be more fiber, and the taste will hardly change at all. But there's one mistake that can cancel out all the benefits. Zucchini absorbs oil really well, and sometimes it seems like there's just a little oil in the pan, but in reality, most of it ends up inside the vegetables. And oil, as we know, is one of the most calorie-dense foods. So if you regularly fry vegetables, I highly recommend getting an oil sprayer. It doesn't cost much, but it lets you use several times less oil without sacrificing flavor. Sometimes it's little things like this that help a person gradually start losing weight. The next vegetable is one that, for some reason, many people underestimate. It's just regular sweet bell pepper. I see the same thing happen all the time. Someone makes a salad, tomatoes, cucumbers, that's it. But if you replace some of the cucumbers with bell pepper, it becomes much healthier. It has more fiber, a lot of vitamin C, and very few carbs. And if you add a little avocado, some greens, and a source of protein, like chicken or tuna in its own juice, you get a complete meal. The next product is something many people avoid for some reason, but they really shouldn't. This is just regular frozen green beans. Personally, I'm actually more of a fan of frozen vegetables in general. Some people think that after freezing, they lose all their benefits. But actually, most of the vitamins and minerals are perfectly preserved. Plus, storing these vegetables is super convenient. All you have to do is open the bag, pour them into a pan, and in a few minutes your side dish is ready. Green beans are also great because they contain not only fiber, but also a small amount of protein. Because of this, they fill you up much better than many other vegetables. So if you want to make a quick dinner, this is one of the best options. The product that usually sparks the most debate: potatoes. For some reason, many people are convinced that people with diabetes are strictly forbidden to eat it. But if you look into it, it turns out that's not the case at all. But if you look into it, it's really not that scary. Potatoes are not the enemy. The real enemy is what we usually do to potatoes. We add a huge amount of oil, fatty sauces, mayonnaise, or turn them into fluffy mashed potatoes. Boiled or baked potatoes by themselves can absolutely be part of a healthy diet. For example, one potato about the size of your fist and definitely served with vegetables and a source of protein. That way, your blood sugar will rise much more slowly. And let's finish this section with a product that doesn't lower blood sugar but makes healthy eating much more enjoyable. That product is spices. Very often people say, "Doctor, healthy food is kind of bland." In reality, the problem usually isn't the food itself, but the fact that at home, people only use salt and black pepper. Try adding some smoked paprika, dried garlic, oregano, basil, thyme, rosemary, and turmeric, or really any other kinds of spices that you might like to use. You can use just about any spices you like. They contribute virtually 0 calories to your meal, and they won't spike your blood sugar, but they can completely transform the flavor of your standard everyday recipes. I just want to warn you about one mistake. Don't believe claims that some spice by itself can cure diabetes. You often hear that cinnamon lowers blood sugar or turmeric can replace medication. Unfortunately, that's a myth. If you like the taste of these spices, that's great. Add them to your food. But you definitely shouldn't expect your blood sugar to become perfect after a cup of tea with cinnamon. So we've covered fruits and vegetables. Now comes the most interesting part. The foods that people with diabetes are most afraid of. Carbohydrates. Very often, after being diagnosed, a person decides to completely cut out carbohydrates. No bread, no pasta, no potatoes. I'll only eat meat and vegetables. It seems logical, but in practice, this approach rarely works for long. It seems logical, but in reality, this approach rarely lasts. A person manages for a few weeks, then breaks down and starts eating everything in sight. That's why my goal isn't to forbid you from eating carbohydrates, but to teach you how to choose the right ones. For example, whole grain pasta. Yes, pasta can be part of your diet if you have diabetes. The main thing is that it should be made from whole grain flour, and ideally cooked al dente. Why is this important? The more thoroughly overcooked a product is, the much more rapidly your body digests it, which means it increases the levels of your blood sugar more quickly. That's why slightly firm pasta is better than pasta that's been cooked until it's mushy. But there's another secret. Never eat pasta by itself. Add chicken, turkey, lean beef, tuna, and definitely a large serving of vegetables. That way, you'll have a complete meal that will keep you feeling full much longer. But these foods are frequently overlooked and unfairly forgotten, even though they're considered some of the most exceptional and nutritious sources of plant-based protein available. Specifically, I am referring to lentils and beans. Why are they so good? Because they're packed with both protein and fiber, and they contain slow-digesting carbs. After a meal like this, your blood sugar usually rises much more steadily than it would after a bun or sweet pastry. The same goes for beans. The only thing I recommend paying attention to, the same goes for beans. The only thing I recommend is that if you're buying canned beans, always read the ingredients list. Some manufacturers add sugar, and it's completely unclear why they do that. Because the simpler the ingredients, the better. And now, let's honestly answer the main question. Is there a single food that can lower blood sugar? No, such a product doesn't exist. Diabetes can't be managed with just one apple, one serving of buckwheat, or one piece of fish. Only a system works. When half your plate is vegetables, there's enough protein, and you still have carbs, but they're of higher quality. When a person is active, watches their weight, and regularly takes their prescribed treatment if they have one, that's when you start seeing results. So don't try to find one perfect food. It's better to gradually build the perfect diet. That's what works for years, not just a few days. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of useful information here.